Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be spending time solving 1- and 2-step equations. And yes, this is a review from last year, but we want to make sure we have those down. Again, we're going to show that mastery in class by scoring at least an 80% on the exit ticket, although this should be a review, so I should see a lot of grades that are higher than that. If we look at our notes, when we are solving equations, we are going to use what's called our inverse operations. And when we talk about inverse, that just means we're doing the opposite operation. Now, we use GEMDAS to solve problems, so we're going to do it in reverse to solve equations. When we have addition in the problem, we're going to use subtraction. When we have subtraction, we're going to use addition. When it comes to multiplication, well, the inverse or opposite of multiplication is division, and the opposite of division is multiplication. And it's important to keep that in mind because you always want to do the opposite. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. The opposite of adding 2 is subtracting 2. Our numbers aren't going to change, but we want to make sure our operations do. If we look at the note sheet, if we start at problem number 1, one thing I want you to get in the habit of doing, whether you did it last year or not, draw a line down your equal sign. We're going to call this the Great Wall of China. You cannot be on both sides of the Great Wall of China. You can only be on one part, and we need to make sure we get to the other side. In this case, I want my variable by itself, so I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. Well, that means the 3 on this side now cancels out, so it is still left on one side. We're going to bring the x down, and we're left with x equals, well, 8 minus 3 is 5, and that becomes our answer. If we plug it back in to check if x equals 5, well, 5 plus 3 equals 8, 5 plus 3 is 8, and 8 equals 8, so it's true. If we look at problem number 2, we have 2x equals negative 6. Again, I'm going to draw my line down my equal sign. Well, if I have a number next to a variable, that means it's my coefficient. If I have a coefficient, that means we're multiplying. And the opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2 on both sides. In this case, these two cancel each other out, and we're left with negative 6 divided by 2, which equals negative 3. And again, if I check myself, 2 times negative 3 equals negative 6. Well, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, and negative 6 equals negative 6, so we're good. Now, if we look at number 3, 3/4 of x equals 11. Again, I'm going to start by drawing that great wall. Now, we can do this in one step, or we can do it in 2 steps. The first things first, when we talk about a fraction, it's always division. We're doing 3 divided by 4. Well, the opposite of dividing by 4 is to multiply by 4. When I do that, my 4's cancel, and I'm left with 3x equals 44. From there, I have a coefficient of 3, which means we're multiplying, so the opposite is to divide by 3. Now, in this case, those cancel, and I'm left with x equals 44 over 3. And again, always keep in mind we want reduced fractions, simplest form. So if you're not sure if 44 over 3 is in simplest form, plug it back into your calculator and double check. Now, to check ourselves, 3 over 4 times 44 over 3 equals 11. Well, those 3 cancel, leaving me 44 over 4 equals 11, and 11 equals 11. So we are good. And you can type that right into your calculator to check if you don't feel like doing it by hand. Now, if we look at number 4, I have negative 5 plus x. Always look at the sign that is in front. In this case, it's negative 5. Well, the opposite of being negative is adding 5 on both sides. Those cancel, and I'm left with x equals 12. And plug it in. Negative 5 plus 12 equals 7. In this case, 7 does equal 7. If you had subtracted 5 on the other side, you would get x equals 2. Well, if I plug that back in to check myself, negative 5 plus 2 does not equal 7. So that would tell you right there that that does not work. And plug it in. It's a simple check to make sure your answers are correct. Now, when it comes to 2-step equations, we're going to follow the same steps as before. The only difference is now we want to start with the term that does not have a variable. So we want to start with our constant. If I look at example 5, my constant is negative 1. Well, the opposite of subtracting 1 is adding 1 on both sides. Those two now cancel. I'm left with 3x equals 8 plus 1 is 9. From here, 3 is my coefficient, which means I'm multiplying. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And in this case, x equals 3. And again, plug it in to check yourself. 3 times 3 minus 1 is 8. Well, if I do order of operations, 3 times 3 is 9 minus 1. And 9 minus 1 is 8, and 8 equals 8. So we're good. I apologize about the bell. If we look at number 6, again, we want to start with the term that does not have a variable. In this case, 2 is my constant, and it's adding 2 to both, so we're going to subtract 2 on both sides. Those will cancel, and I'm left with x divided by negative 6 equals 12. Well, from here, it's a fraction. And again, remember, a fraction is division. So we're going to multiply both sides times negative 6. Those cancel, and I'm left with x equals negative 72. And again, plug it in to check yourself. Negative 72 divided by negative 6 plus 2 equals 14. Order of operations tell me to do the division first. Well, 72 divided by 6 is 12. Plus 2, 12 plus 2 is 14, and 14 equals 14, so we are good. In example 7, it looks a little different because it's a whole fraction to start. And if we think of order of operations, we would start with the top. So if we're doing the opposite, we're going to start with our denominator. Instead of dividing by 3, we want to get rid of that fraction, so we're going to multiply both sides by 3. The 3's cancel. I'm left with x minus 7 equals 15. Well, from there, we know the opposite of subtracting 7 is adding 7 on both sides. So x is going to equal 22. Now, when I plug it in, I have 22 minus 7 over 3 equals 5. Again, if we use order of operations, we want to simplify our numerator first. So I have 15 divided by 3 equals 5. Well, 15 divided by 3 is 5, and so 5 is going to equal 5. Our last problem. Again, we want to start with our constant. And if we look, I know I've always told you alphabetical order. This is not in the right order, but we can still solve it. In this case, my constant is that positive 4 in the front. Again, we want to take the sign that's in front of it. If there is no sign, it's positive. So the opposite of positive 4 is subtracting 4 on both sides. 4 minus 4 cancels, and I'm left with negative 1x equals 8. In this case, I added the 1 because anytime you have a variable without a coefficient, you can add that 1 there. So I'm going to now divide by negative 1 on both sides. We want the negatives to cancel as well as the coefficients. Well, 8 divided by negative 1 is negative 8. If I plug it back in, 4 minus negative 8 equals 12. Well, we know two negatives make a positive, and 4 plus 8 equals 12. So 12 is going to equal 12. Hopefully this quick review helped to remind you how to solve 1- and 2-step equations. Please bring your notes and any questions you have to class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then.